What's up, guys, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, everybody. Let's talk about the economic state of the country. This is the best place to start for the podcast. I'm just kidding. We'll start with the economic state of the PFL, because they apparently, according to Patricio Pitbull and before Gegard Mousasi, don't pay their athletes, especially the Bellator fighters, or they're not letting them go from their contracts. So Patricio Pitbull said that he's been trying to get out of his contract, which is going to expire in May, to go and do other things, and it'd be awesome for them to come to the UFC. But for some reason, he feels like they're holding him hostage over there to do what? Because he's not fighting. If he's not fighting, why would they still want him over there? Maybe to shorthand the UFC or any other organization. It's interesting because Pitbull said he's a Bellator fighter. And since Bellator is gone, he should also go and fight in the organization that he wants. It's the same kind of complaint that Gegard Mousasi had. Mousasi said that they were not letting him go to other organizations. They were not giving him fights either, so they were just holding him hostage. No fights, under contract, and you cannot leave. Now we know this is like not a rare thing in MMA with these big promotions, but it's sad to see a legend, or at least a veteran like Pitbull, not being able to go and fight where he wants to fight. He'll be an excellent addition in the UFC's featherweight division and part-time lightweight. He could fight in both weight classes. I don't think he's going to be trying to get a title shot, but he'd be like another Michael Chandler, like another guy who's going to put on exciting fights. Can you imagine Patricio Pitbull versus Diego Lopez? That fight would be insane. Or him versus John Silva. Did you guys hear Jamahal Hill saying that he wants to go up to heavyweight to fight Tom Aspinall? He says if he hits Tom Aspinall first, admittingly that Aspinall is more powerful than he is, but if he hit him first, he would still win the fight. And he said he'd had fun fighting against Tom Aspinall. I don't think that fight would be too fun for him. If he didn't think the Alex Pereira fight was fun, this fight would definitely not be fun for him. Most likely. Jamahal has a chance. 240 pounds is a big guy. Hit very hard. He'll be fast for the weight class. But if we analyze both of their skills, Tom is better than Jamahal at everything, except fighting in southpaw and throwing long power punches. That's it. Tom has better footwork, way better footwork, it's not even close. He hits harder, he's bigger, he's faster, he has better wrestling, he has better Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, he has better submissions. I'd imagine Tom would beat Jamahal, making the Alex fight look like it was competitive. The only fight for Tom is Jon Jones, and that's it. Everyone else gets completely destroyed, most likely, right? If he fought Alex, take him down, submit him. He's too big and he's too good on the ground. And Alex's takedown defense, although getting better, I don't think it's on the level to stop a blast double leg from Tom, like the same double leg he took down Arlovsky with, or even Volkov with. I mean, under the punch too, time the left hook or the straight right, double leg him off his feet, submit him on top. Alex would not be able to get up with Tom on top of him. He fights Jamahal Hill, it would be something similar. In fact, I think Tom would knock him out in the stand-up. Those huge haymakers are perfect for Tom to shoot down his 1-2. Jab straight punch beat looping punch, drops Jamahal, and then finishes him with a ground and pound. Ciryl Gane most likely gets taken to the ground, submitted. Volkov, same thing. The only guy that can beat Tom Aspinall, in my opinion, is Jon Jones, which I would slightly favor Tom in, but I can see both fighters winning that fight. And that just speaks to how great Tom is, and kind of how shallow the heavyweight division is as well as light heavyweight, honestly. Because none of those guys from light heavyweight to heavyweight is beating Tom, most likely. Because anything can happen in these weight classes, right? That's why I'm saying most likely. Tom could get chinned by Shamil Gaziev. That's the kind of weight class this is. Derek Lewis fought for a title before. Tai Tuivasa was a top 3 fighter, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. But the probability of beating Tom is lower than any other heavyweight outside of talking about Jon Jones, right? If the only fighter that can beat Tom is the greatest of all time, arguably, that also speaks to how great Tom is. And the crazy thing is that he's not even in his prime. Usually the heavyweight's prime is like in their mid-30s. Tom is 32. He might be 2 years away from his prime, which is insane to think about because he's already beaten half of the top 10. And if he beats Jon Jones, there's nothing stopping him from beating the other half of the top 10. If he beats Jones, we're going to have to be talking about Tom Aspinall as one of the greatest heavyweights of all time and one of the most dominant fighters in the sport, because there's only one other champion currently that has beaten more of the top 10 than he has, and that's Alexandre Pantoja. That's the only guy, and it's crazy that Pantoja is the lowest ranked pound for pound champion. He's ranked number 9. He's literally the lowest ranked champion. That makes no sense. He is easily in the top 5. Easily. And this disrespect of Alexandre Pantoja by these journalists is ridiculous. What do they think of this guy? He is 10-0 against the top 15 of the flyweight division. Do you know how absurd that is? And you rank him number 9? I think Alexandre Pantoja is easily in the top 5. And another fighter that could be a pound for pound top ranked fighter is Khamzat Chimaev. So there are rumors that he might be the one that fights Alex Pereira next, which would be insane. He started as technically a middleweight in the UFC, he went down to welterweight, back up to middleweight, and then up to light heavyweight would be crazy in a title shot. His first title shot being 2 weight classes above where he usually fought. And I agree with Robert Whittaker that Khamzat would beat Alex. I think so. Even though Alex is much bigger, he's probably like 15 to 20 pounds heavier, I think Khamzat will still take him down and submit him. But I also do agree with Whittaker that if Khamzat starts to get tired because he wasn't able to finish Alex and the fight stays standing, Khamzat has a harder time taking him to the ground, Alex would absolutely brutalize him in the stand-up. But they can't do that fight, man. When you have Magomed Ankalaev as the #1 contender, you have to do that fight. If Alex fights Khamzat instead of Ankalaev, to be fair, you have to hold him on the same standard as someone like Jon Jones. If he doesn't fight Ankalaev right now, he ducked the #1 contender. So hopefully he's fighting Ankalaev next. Hopefully Khamzat gets the winner of Dricus and Strickland. And Jon Jones talked about his 5-year plan. He says that he wants to have 1 or 2 fights in the next 5 years and also get into acting more. He says he wants to be a great actor, and then in 10 years he just wants to, I guess, retire in 1 to 2 fights. He obviously has to fight Tom, and I'm guessing the other is Alex, win or lose. So let's say he fights Tom next. He beats him or loses to him. Regardless, he can go down to the light heavyweight division, or Alex can even come up to heavyweight and fight Jon Jones in a massive event. But with that, let's go right to the questions. And we're going to start with Sushant Kop. Hey Weasel, great content as usual. Thank you so much, man. Question: who is the best fighter in every weight division? Uncrowned champions. Heavyweight is Tom Aspinall. Light heavyweight is Alex Pereira. Middleweight is Khamzat Chimaev. Welterweight is Belal Muhammad. Lightweight is Islam Makhachev. Featherweight is Ilia Topuria. But he could be challenged in the future by John Silva. I think John Silva has a good shot at being one of the best, if not the best featherweight in the future. Bantamweight, I think it's Umar. Flyweight, I think it's Pantoja. I mean, how can you say anyone different at this point? He's essentially beaten everybody. For the women's bantamweight division, it's Kayla Harrison. Women's flyweight, I think it's Natalia Silva. For the strawweight division, I think it's Zhang Weili. Your next question: who from the former champions has a chance to regain the UFC gold again, if any? Sean Strickland can. He can beat Dricus. I think no matter what, the fight is always going to be competitive. And if he just adds on some counterpunching, he can absolutely win that fight. Because it's hard to hold down. He's got good boxing for the weight class, especially against someone like Dricus. And he doesn't make a lot of mistakes standing, right? He fights Dricus like he fights everybody else, which is different than most fighters. Because when you're fighting Dricus, he makes you get into like this chaos that is so unconventional. It could even make some of the best strikers in the world like Adesanya and Whittaker fall into these ditches that only Dricus can climb out of. But Strickland doesn't fall into these the same way the other fighters do because he focuses on his own game more than anybody else. That's why he fights the same in every single fight, except like when he fought Abus Magomedov and Nasruddin Imavov. Abus was gassing out. That's when he put on the pressure. He was able to finish him in the second round. And against Nasruddin Imavov, he was the bigger fighter. He was taking on short notice, using that to his advantage against Imavov. So those are like the 2 fights where he was fighting differently, but against the other high-ranked middleweights, he's mostly fighting the same way, even against someone like Dricus. So Strickland is one of the fighters that can regain the UFC gold. Another is Charles Oliveira, not the most likely, but more likely than most other fighters. I still think stylistically, he can give Islam Makhachev a competitive fight. You can't count on Volkanovski, he's one of the greatest of all time. He could win, although I don't think so. I think Ilia would knock him out again. But technically, he could also fight Diego Lopez for a vacant title or an interim title if Ilia goes up to lightweight. So technically there, he could win the UFC gold again. The interim championship should be silver. I think it'll look cool. I think Peter Yan, if Umar wins the belt, has a better chance of winning the gold back. I think he's a better stylistic matchup against Umar than he is against Merab, because Umar is not going to drown him and beat him with volume the same way that Merab would. So Umar would give Peter Yan more chances in the beginning of the fight to get his reads before he starts landing shots in like the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rounds. Those are some of the former champions I think that can win the belt again. Then your next question: who will be the next double champ in the UFC? I think the next double champ are either Islam or Pantoja. There's Khamzat though. He could be a double champ, but he's never even won the belt yet. So it's crazy to think about that. A fighter who's never even won the belt in the first place to win 2 belts. It just speaks to how great Khamzat is, because we don't think about a lot of fighters in that same way before they ever even win the first belt. With Khamzat, it's like, oh, not only he's going to win the first belt, but he's going to go up to the next weight class and win that belt too. And he's favored to do both. He's favored to beat Dricus, and he's favored to beat Alex too. It's crazy. And he's never been a champion yet. It's insane. I think Ilia can, but to beat Islam is much more difficult than beating any other champion in the UFC right now. So like he has a harder path to become a double champ compared to anyone else basically. Then we go to Richard Connolly. Hey Weasel, 2 questions about Ilia Topuria. Number 1, how do you imagine Marvin Vettori and Jon Jones reacting if they took Ilia's hardest shot? Would it rock them a little bit or they'd have no reaction? If they just let him punch them on the jaw, I think he would rock them. But then again, this would be true for most fighters. Number 2, would Ilia be champ or not if he just had average featherweight power? Or no, because his power is a major part of his style. Would he become a champion? If he had average power, I think he still would become champion. He's very skilled. His boxing isn't necessarily defined by only his power. In fact, I don't even think his power is the major part of his boxing that makes him effective. I think it's his technique, because I don't think he hits harder than Justin Gaethje. I think power for power, like if you were to measure their punches on a power cube or whatever scientific way they can do it, I think Justin Gaethje would punch with more pure power, but I think Ilia is more precise with his shots. I think he knows where to land them better. And his form of his punches are way sharper. I mean, look at the way that he throws punches compared to Justin Gaethje. They both fought Max Holloway, and Justin's the only other fighter that dropped Max in a fight and they never counted that knockdown, which is crazy. But if you look at the way that Justin throws his punches, sometimes they look like slapping punches, like he's almost hitting with the inside of his hand. Ilia never does that, ever. The way Ilia punches would satisfy any boxing coach in the world. The way that Justin Gaethje punches would get some boxing coaches to scold him in the training room. And that's the same with a lot of other fighters in the UFC. Ilia has the best boxing form in the UFC. The form of his punches are as good as it comes so far until in the future, fighters are going to be punching even better than he does. He's very precise with his punches, and he does have crazy knockout power. Then go to Troy Hartung. If Khamzat keeps winning and eventually becomes the 185-pound champion, do you see him defending the belt once or twice, then being given the opportunity to fight Alex Pereira for the 205-pound belt? How would you see that fight going down? And if Khamzat were to become the 205 champion before Jon Jones retires, do you see that being a super fight? Would it be the biggest fight that could headline a pay-per-view in the near future? And how would you see a fight between Jon Jones and Khamzat going down at either 205 or at a catchweight, factoring in the Khamzat skill set keeps getting better? It's probably unlikely the fight will ever happen, but if Khamzat gets to the star level that Alex Pereira is at right now, or even higher, then I imagine Jones may be interested in the fight. Do you agree or disagree? So if he wins the middleweight title, I do think he will defend the belt once, then they might allow him to move up to 205, even though he should defend the belt 3 times. And I do think he would beat Alex. And let's say he beats Alex, and Jon Jones sees that as a super fight. I do think it would be one of the biggest UFC fights. I think that might be Jones's biggest fight currently, as far as we know, because we don't know how big the Tom fight will be. But without that, I think the Khamzat fight would be the biggest. I think it would do over 1 million buys, especially after Khamzat beats Alex, and the way he would most likely win is like a first or second round submission. If he submits Alex in the first or second round, the Jon Jones fight would be so massive, but Jon Jones would win. He's just too big and too good at wrestling, and he's too intelligent. He has the highest fight IQ out of any fighter I've ever seen. And yes, I do think if Khamzat beats Alex, Jones would be interested in the fight. I mean, he wanted to fight Adesanya, and I think Khamzat is heavier than Adesanya too, so. Then go to Kamikaze. Hi Weasel, as always, amazing content. Thank you so much, man. Charles lost to Arman and beat Chandler. I don't feel like this would give him a title shot. Should he be given a chance against a rising contender? And if he wins it, at least we know there are no contenders. What are your thoughts? Yeah, I wouldn't mind Oliveira to have another fight. The main reason he would get a title shot is by default, because there is no other contender. And he just beat Chandler, and he had a very close fight with Arman. He knocked out Beneil Dariush. You know, it's not like he's been beaten soundly by anybody besides Islam. And also, he's one of the greatest lightweights of all time who had multiple title defenses. So if there is no other contender, Oliveira is there for a title shot. But maybe he could fight Max. Maybe he could fight Ilia. These are fights that would be great. An Oliveira and Holloway rematch, because the first fight was nothing. A rematch where they're at their full potential, no injuries during the fight, both fighters at their best. It could be a fight of the year candidate. And honestly, I don't know who wins. Who wins between Charles Oliveira and Max Holloway? The only thing that could change the dynamic of that fight is if Max's chin is gone from the Ilia knockout. We've seen that happen before with some fighters. Maybe Max is still good. Maybe he's still durable. You know, at lightweight, his chin is probably even better. But it'd be such an insane fight, man. Charles has the power advantage. He's better on the ground. He has the wrestling. There's actually something about Max that he doesn't normally go up against. He normally does not fight other wrestlers. How many guys that have good wrestling and actually use their good wrestling fought Max Holloway? Ilia has good wrestling. He took him down. He wasn't able to hold him down, but he did take him down once. He contested the rest of the fight in the stand-up. Justin Gaethje shot no takedowns, and he rarely ever wrestles. Korean Zombie shot 1 takedown, and he's not a great wrestler. right? He's more of a striker, jiu-jitsu guy. Arnold Allen has decent wrestling, but he shot 0 takedowns. Volkanovski, that's the only guy, right? And Volkanovski won the second fight because he used this wrestling. He mixed it up with his striking and started to win the fight after the second round. Yair took him down, and he's not a great wrestler. Kelvin Kattar is not a great wrestler. And there was Frankie. Yeah, Frankie was a good wrestler, but Frankie was arguably not in his prime anymore when they fought. He came off the win against Cub Swanson before they got knocked out by Brian Ortega. He was over the hill by then. Dustin, not a great wrestler. He can wrestle. We saw that against Joe Duffy. That was probably the best his offensive wrestling ever looked. Brian Ortega took him down a couple times. Not a great wrestler, even though his wrestling is getting better, but especially back in 2018, he was not a wrestler at all. Jose Aldo, Anthony Pettis. Ricardo Lamas was a good wrestler. Yeah, so not a lot of wrestlers, man. And Charles Oliveira is getting a lot better with his wrestling. He's also bigger than Max, and he took down Michael Chandler multiple times. Bro was dieseled out in that fight. You see how big he was? Charles is bigger than he's ever been before. Now, that could have been specifically to fight Chandler, but if he's that much more muscle bound, going into his next fights, his wrestling is going to be a factor in most of them. Whether it's offensively, taking the opponent down like I think he would do against Max, or defensively, trying to stop the takedowns of Islam and Arman. But I do think that Max is the more technical striker of the two. So I can see the fight going both ways. They're going to add Hamala. Who is the next Jon Jones? If you're asking who's going to be the next greatest of all time, no one right now. They would have Mike Griffith. Oh, we got a disagreement here. Okay. I've been agreeing with you on everything, but the other day you said Max Holloway is a better striker than Israel Adesanya, and I'm like, wait, what? Seriously? I love Max Holloway, but how is he a better striker than Adesanya? The art of striking is hitting and not getting hit. Max Holloway is getting hit more than Adesanya. Adesanya has way better head movement, better kicks, and gets hit way less. How on earth is Max a better striker than Adesanya? Can you please elaborate on that? And while you're at it, now that Max is at lightweight, what would be a dream fight at that weight class? I would say Charles Oliveira is like the best fight, but how is Max a better striker than Adesanya? These are the kind of hot takes that I think most fans will not agree with, but I do believe this take is correct. When we're talking about weight classes and why certain weight classes are better than the others, it kind of like diminishes the weight classes of some of fans' favorites, right? Some fans love Adesanya or just the weight class in general. If you say that Max is a better striker than Adesanya, it's not only making a difference between Max and Adesanya specifically, but it's also making a difference between the weight classes. So here's why Max Holloway is a better striker than Israel Adesanya. First, we'll go by your argument, the stats. Striking is about hitting and not getting hit, and Adesanya is better at that than Max Holloway. So that's your argument. This is actually not true. Max Holloway has better statistic striking defense than Israel Adesanya. That's going to sound crazy, but statistically it's actually true. Adesanya has a 56% striking defensive rate. He gets hit 44% of the time. Max Holloway has a 59% striking defensive rate. He gets hit 41% of the time. A 3% difference, which is actually a lot over the course of their entire UFC careers. But Adesanya has 1% higher striking accuracy. He lands 48% of the time. Max lands 47% of the time. It's 1% difference. So statistically, Max is the better striker. You might be questioning, why then do we always hear about Max getting hit so much? He gets hit the most by total numbers, but he also defends more strikes than anybody else at the same time. What that shows you is fighters are throwing punches at Max more than anybody else. That's what that means. Max has had to defend against more strikes than any fighter in UFC history. In most of his fights, the fighters are landing around 100 strikes on him, but they're also throwing over 200 strikes on average. Some of them getting up to 300 strikes thrown at him. Like, it's insane. While with Adesanya, it's not the same. In a lot of Adesanya's fights, the strikes are more around like 40 strikes landing, 70, 90. The most was 137, and that's when he fought Sean Strickland, who was going to be throwing that many shots. The most strikes landed on Max was when he fought Volkanovski the third time. 199 strikes landed on him. 199. And Volk threw 372 strikes. Significant strikes, right? This is all about significant strikes. It's insane how many shots land on him and how much he has to defend too. He defends 59% of them. So statistically, Max is the better striker, and also technically as well, especially when you look at the boxing between the two. Adesanya's kicks are about as good as Max's, if not even better, but Max has him beat with punches and footwork. Adesanya's weakest part of his striking is his boxing and getting stuck on the fence. He's very good at defending takedowns against the fence, but he gets hit by strikes way more when he's against the fence. This is shown in the Alex Pereira fight. other than the knockout that he landed on him. He's still a good counterpuncher, but his boxing defense is worse there. Alex was landing every single shot that he was throwing. Strickland was landing the entire fight against the fence. Dricus had him running along the cage after hitting him with some shots. Max is better at throwing combinations. He has better overall boxing, especially defensively. He telegraphs his shots less, both for punches and kicks. He's better at using his feints in order to land strikes on his opponent. And he's fighting better strikers mostly. Most of the strikers that he fights are not as good as Volk. They're not as good as Aldo. They're not as good as Justin Gaethje or Dustin Poirier, or even Yair is better than a lot of strikers that Adesanya fights. Even Kelvin Kattar is a really good striker compared to most of the fighters that Adesanya fights. Like, for example, Kelvin Kattar is better than Jared Cannonier and Marvin Vettori and various other fighters. But those are the reasons why I believe that Max Holloway is a better striker than Adesanya. When you really think of both fighters' skills and everything they do in the stand-up, it's harder to point at one thing that Adesanya does better than Max, other than use his reach. But Max doesn't really have a long reach. So that's the one physical advantage. It's more of an attribute that Adesanya has over Max. I guess throwing question mark kicks and more creative techniques like that, but Max has good spinning kicks. He has a good high kick as well, and he uses them in combination better than Adesanya does. Adesanya is not as much of a combination guy as Max is, and that's the other thing too. Adesanya hits harder, so he has like these physical advantages over technical advantages. I think Max is technically better than Adesanya at almost everything when it comes to striking, but Adesanya has physical advantages like reach and power that he's able to work with that Max doesn't have, right? Even comparable to the weight class, he has a 69-inch reach, even though he's 5'11". Adesanya is 6'4", has an 80-inch reach. So if Adesanya was 5'11", his reach would still be like 75 inches. That's the only way I can see Adesanya being a better striker than Max, is because he can get more knockouts, and he uses his reach both offensively and defensively better than Max Holloway. That's it. And I think the reason a lot of people think Adesanya is a better striker than Max is because of the kickboxing stuff. If you hear that a fighter came from kickboxing, it automatically creates this narrative that this guy's a really good striker for MMA, when that's not necessarily true. We've seen a lot of kickboxers come into the sport and get outstruck by many different fighters. And that's not to say that Adesanya is a bad striker, because I don't know why this happens, but like whenever we're comparing two fighters, especially two all-time great fighters, on which one's better in certain areas, if you say this fighter is better, people take it as you're saying the other guy's a bad fighter, which that's not true. Now, I would say Max Holloway is top 5 most skilled strikers ever in the UFC. I'm not really factoring power as much because it does change the way striking can go. In fact, fighters who are horrible technically can win fights because of their power. So that's like a given with a lot of these other guys, right? To truly understand who is the best striker is usually to get away from power advantages. Because for an example, would anybody ever say that Derek Lewis is a better striker than Alexander Volkov, for an example? If we don't factor in power advantages and stuff, then yes, I think Max is a more technical striker than Adesanya. But if you want to argue that Adesanya is a better striker than Max, it's mostly going to have to be about his power and his reach. So like these physical advantages that he has over technical advantages that they develop in the training room. Max, I believe, is a more skilled striker than Adesanya. But because he's lower weight, he's not going to hit as hard, he's not going to be as long, he's not going to have the same physical advantages. If they ever fought each other, obviously Adesanya would knock him out. So that's why we look at skills and technique. But then you can look at the other way and say that Adesanya being so much heavier, of course he's not going to strike as technical as Max. I think it's a cop-out. I think it's kind of cope, because flyweights are not the most technical in the UFC on average. They're the smallest weight class, they're the most athletic, they're the fastest, they're the most nimble, but they're not the most technical on average. Lightweights have generally been the most technical for years, even though they're sized near the middle of all weight classes. They're in the center of all the weight classes, them and welterweights. And lightweights have been the most technical on average for a long time. Why is that? It's not about being smaller and more nimble. And most people are sized at around lightweight, resulting in them being the most technical. I believe the lightweight division also has the most fighters in total. The more fighters you have in a weight class, generally the higher the talent is going to be as well. So it's about talent pool rather than size. And most of the talent is going to be around the average size of a man, right? The flyweights are the fastest, the most nimble, the most athletic, but they're not the best. They're not the most technical. They're not the most skilled, generally. The main reason why the heavy fighters are not as technical is because the talent just isn't there. That talent is in other sports. If you look at the most technical strikers in the sport, for an example, you think of Alex Pereira, Ilia Topuria, Alexander Volkanovski, Max Holloway, Dustin Poirier, Israel Adesanya, Anderson Silva. What do you notice about those fighters? Which of them are the most flashy? Because a lot of people confuse flashy, acrobatic, athletic techniques like wheel kicks, flying knees, and stuff like that as being technical, when that's not true. Just because someone could throw a wheel kick does not make them technical. Just because they even have a good wheel kick does not make them technical. Unless it's implemented in their style, like Stephen Thompson. He comes from karate. That's just the way he fights. So the techniques that he's learned throughout all these years are going to be technical because he's honing his craft. But then you look at Ilia Topuria, he's mostly a boxer who throws a few leg kicks in the striking. But he's one of the best strikers we've ever seen in the sport. But he's honing the craft of boxing, punching technique with good footwork. And his footwork is not elusive either. He moves very slightly. He's not moving all around the cage, right? These big movements are generally confusing the audience and misguiding them as being effective or technical. It's the smaller movements that create the difference on who is technical and who isn't. So when you look at the best strikers right there, which of them are more flashy and acrobatic with their technique? Adesanya, Silva, and even Alex Pereira are flashier than Ilia, Dustin, and Volk. Ilia, Dustin, and Volk, I don't think have ever thrown a wheel kick ever in the UFC. I don't think any of them ever threw any kind of like spinning attack in general. Those three guys are fighting by the basics. Jab, straight, uppercut, guard up, leg kick. Volk throws a roundhouse to the head sometimes. Like, these guys fight by the fundamentals. But Silva, Adesanya, and Alex are bigger than them. They're middleweights and light heavyweights. Ilia, Dustin, and Volk are arguably more technical while also just using the fundamentals, just using the basics of striking. Technical striking is not exclusively about who is the flashiest, who could throw a wheel kick and the fastest flying knee out there. The most technical striker is the one who can throw a jab the most perfectly, brings their hands back to guard their chin after throwing the punch, rotating their hips when they're throwing kicks, less telegraph while throwing these strikes, like less flaring of the elbows when throwing punches, or less loading of power punches. This is how Ilia, Dustin, and Volk fight, even though these guys are featherweights and lightweights. What makes a truly technical fighter are the basics. How good are you with the fundamentals? That's what makes you a technical fighter. All the flashiness is misguided and confused as technical, when that's not true. Like Yair Rodriguez, right? Yair is not one of the most technical strikers, even though he's the flashiest out of all of them. Ilia Topuria is the opposite of Yair. He is all about the basics of fundamentals, and he's way better at striking than Yair. Way better. Ilia Topuria fights like a heavier fighter would. Any heavyweight can fight like Ilia does. He'll just be slower. But everybody heavyweight's slower. What's stopping a heavyweight fighter from having a boxing stance, hands up, jab, right overhand, left hook to the body, one leg kick or two, blast double leg? These are all just the basic stuff that any fighter, no matter what size they are, can do. And Ilia is one of the best strikers we've ever seen in the sport doing that very same thing. So that's why I think this whole like, if you're smaller, you're going to be more technical is a complete cop-out. You don't need to be smaller to be more technical. You could be as big as you want. We have so many examples of them. It's just that in the UFC, we don't have the best talent in the heavier weight classes. Why? Because they're in other sports. They're in American football, they're in basketball, they're in baseball, they're in hockey. They're in different sports. They're not in the UFC. Most of the actual high-level talent in the UFC are from welterweight down because they don't necessarily have a sport to go to other than football or soccer. Any other sport's not going to pay them a lot of money, so they might as well come to the UFC because it's going to pay them the most money for the average size man. That's why. If it's not boxing, of course, they could also go to boxing. So I don't agree with the whole smaller fighters are more technical because they're smaller argument. I think that's arguing for the flashy techniques, which is not the same as being technical, because you could throw a question mark kick or a wheel kick does not mean you're a technical striker. I would say the guy who has mastered the basics is always going to be more technical than a guy who could throw a wheel kick in 30 different ways. Great question though, man. I love conversations about that because I've been in so many debates about this with friends and stuff. So I think with a Nano Peach, with John and Tom teasing something, what do you think are the chances of them fighting? Like, I think like 70% chance that they'll fight each other. Hill and Jiri in-depth breakdown. Hopefully Jiri wins. I don't like Hill's constantly disrespecting everybody. Yeah, I think he's playing into like this character now. Because his whole thing with fighting Tom Aspinall was just, you couldn't even beat Alex. You want to jump up to heavyweight now? Him walking up to Alex in the gym and Alex gives him the gloves and tells him, let's fight now. And Jamahal Hill's like, I was ready to fight you without the gloves. I mean, weren't you telling him for free? Like, you're questioning, like, you're going to fight me for free? It sounded like Hill didn't want to actually fight him. And it's funny because Jiri talked about that situation. He said he thought that Jamahal Hill should have fought him with the gloves on. He said he should have put on the gloves and fought Alex Pereira, like, out of some kind of, like, honor thing. But Hill versus Jiri in-depth breakdown, I don't think, honestly, it's that in-depth of a fight. Jiri can make this fight kind of similar to the way he made the Rock Hitch fight. He eats some big punches, but then he lands one big shot on Hill, rocks him, and then TKOs him because of it. Jiri's style is so chaotic and unconventional, it's almost impossible to actually make a realistic breakdown on how he fights and what he's going to do leading up to a fight. You kind of just have to trust the process, right? You just got to be a fan and just hope he wins. But I do think he will win. I think his durability, and Hill is very open when he throws punches. I think Jiri will eventually land some like spinning elbow or something crazy like that. Valentina versus Dakota, UFC versus the PFL. I think Dakota would win. She's in her prime. Valentina might not fight that much longer. And also Dakota is one of the best women fighters in the world. And she's only getting better, which is crazy. I don't think they'll ever give her to the UFC. She's too good. Like, they found a talent that's actually better than most of the UFC fighters. There's no way they give her up. If you make matchups for all the current champions, what would they be? Tom versus Jon, Alex versus Ankalaev, Dricus versus Khamzat, Belal versus Shavkat, Islam versus Oliveira 2, Ilia versus Diego, I guess Merab versus Umar. I would like to see Jan versus Umar more than all of them, but Merab is champ, so I would say him and Umar. It's probably the most competitive fight. And Pantoja versus Figueiredo. I want to see the rematch. That's what they should have done. And build your ultimate UFC card with current fighters. Main event, Tom versus Jon. Co-main event is Islam versus Oliveira 2, even though they'll never do one pay-per-view with both of those. Third title fight would be Pantoja versus Figueiredo 2, Maximus versus Dustin 3, and Manel Kape versus Kai Kara France. That'd be a sick main card. And then GOATs of every division versus current champs. Prime Stipe versus Jon Jones. I would go with Jon Jones. Prime Stipe versus Tom Aspinall. I'll go with Stipe. Jon Jones versus Alex Pereira at light heavyweight. I'll go Jones. Anderson Silva versus Dricus du Plessis. I would go with Anderson Silva. Georges St. Pierre versus Belal Muhammad. I'll go with GSP. Habib versus Islam. I'll go with Habib. Jose Aldo versus Ilia Topuria. I will go with Ilia. Dominic Cruz versus Merab Dvalishvili. I'll go with Dominic Cruz. I think his footwork would be the main difference. Merab's not a big leg kicker. Doesn't have a lot of power. He'd be trying to wrestle the whole time, and Cruz is underrated, one of the best scramblers in the sport. Very hard to hold that guy down. And if you don't have the leg kicks, you don't have the punching power to intercept his movements when he's trying to come in, the way Cody Garbrandt did, it's going to be a very hard fight. And I think Merab moves mostly in straight lines. His footwork is very, very one-dimensional compared to Dominic Cruz. Actually, some of the most rudimentary footwork out of anyone Cruz has fought. I think Cruz could be able to read the movements of Merab very well compared to, let's say, when he fought TJ or Cody or Demetrius Johnson and various other fighters who are way better at footwork than Merab. Yeah, I'll go with Cruz. I think he would win a decision. He was also bigger too. He was longer, taller, he looked heavier. And then Demetrius Johnson versus Alexandre Pantoja. That's another great fight. I'd probably go with Pantoja slightly. Demetrius has the better striking, but Pantoja has a lot of punching power. He's not technical, but he's got heavy punches and he has a good takedown. He's bigger, he has better jiu-jitsu, which is very rare for DJ to fight against. Because DJ's usual reinforcement is the takedown, right? He's very good at mixing in his striking with seamless takedowns. He wouldn't be able to do it against Pantoja the same way. He would have to try to outstrike him. It's a really close one. If I have to pick, I would go slightly with Pantoja, but honestly, it's like a 50-50. So, Nano, thank you for the questions. I'm going to go to the recent questions I asked a few hours ago. Just to be fair to them, so they didn't have enough time. As a Christmas present, I guess. Then we're going to only one fate. Can you beat an orca? What do you mean by beat? Can I beat an orca at analyzing an MMA fight? Yes, I would think so. But yeah, absolutely not in a fight. No way. How can a human fight an orca? On land, he'd probably win, but you do like negative damage by hitting him. Probably hurt yourself. What is like the most dangerous animal that a human could beat? I would say a cheetah. I think a human could beat a cheetah in a fight because cheetah's claws are not sharp. They're rounded and their bones are hollow. Now, don't get me wrong. That thing jumps on your neck. It's over. That thing will tear you to shreds. But it's not that heavy, right? How heavy is a cheetah? If I'm not wrong, they're like 100 pounds, right? Their average weight is between 75 and 125 pounds. So about 100 pounds. I think that would be the most dangerous or biggest animal that a human can beat. After that, it gets a little too crazy, right? It was funny. I was talking with a friend about this, and we're talking about like rhinos and hippos. Like, which of those animals will win in a fight? A rhino versus a hippo? Because obviously the rhino can just charge at it, but a hippo can bite on the rhino, but I don't think it would crush it. It says here that a rhino is heavier, but I guess on average, they're heavier. But the biggest hippo they found was 9,900 pounds. So if a rhino is heavier, it most likely would win, right? It says here the most likely outcome would back off eventually in the fight because hippos are way more aggressive. Rhinos are essentially blind. They're all nearsighted. And also rhinos are not as intelligent. So basically, a rhino has a great chin, but no heart. And the hippo has that dog in him, essentially. Oh, I didn't know this. Rhino's horn is not actually a part of their skull. It's made out of keratin. That's interesting. So it would not be impactful in close quarters, only when they charge. That makes sense. So I guess in close quarters, the hippo will just keep trying to bite it over and over again. And then the rhino will be like, all right, I'm done. Let's go home. Then what beats a hippo besides obviously an elephant? What animals could beat a hippo in a fight? This is what AI says. A killer whale. Sure, if we're going to the ocean. Komodo dragon. Okay, yeah, that makes sense because the venom. A poacher with an AK-47. I don't know if that's what we're talking about here. Then we go to I-870. Where does Tyson Fury rank in current era of heavyweight boxers? So your considerations why Tyson Fury may not be the second best heavyweight boxer. He didn't fight Parker, Pulev, Dubois, Joshua, pop for PEDs, arguably lost to Ngannou, nearly became became Usyk's second heavyweight knockout. I can see it, yeah. I think Tyson Fury with the Deontay Wilder wins and Joshua losing more. He lost to Andy Ruiz and also to Daniel Dubois, but it's hard to say. I can see Joshua being the second best. Then we go to Dudu. Hey Weasel, do you think Colby Covington ruined his career by leaving American Top Team, or inactivity, or getting run up on by Jorge, or a mix of all, or some, or none? It could have been a mix of all. I mean, obviously, every single one of those would have an effect on his career. I think him leaving American Top Team was like a big difference because he fought the same fighter, Kamaru Usman. One was with American Top Team, the first fight, which he was winning the majority of it until he got TKO'd. The second fight was after he left American Top Team, and he fought differently. He wasn't as aggressive. He wasn't as about volume, and there was definitely a difference in Colby when he was with American Top Team and when he wasn't with American Top Team. So I think it had some kind of effect on his style. And then the inactivity is always going to hurt your career. And he was looking at other things outside the UFC. Now he's a professional poker player or whatever. He's making a lot of money over there. And then the sucker punch from Jorge kept him more inactive. So there is a mix of all. I don't know which one hurt his career more than the other, but I would think the inactivity was the biggest one. From 2020 to 2024, he only had 5 fights, where before that he was fighting on average twice a year. 22 total fights professionally, and he's near retirement. He didn't really fight that much. I mean, can you imagine if Colby Covington was fighting 3 times a year? He would have fought everybody, but he made a lot of money in the sport. He was a big name at one point. He fought for the title 4 times, including the interim title. Yeah, that's it. I mean, the only thing he didn't get to do was win the undisputed title. He was more successful at the end of his career than most fighters ever would be. He was seemingly the second best welterweight for a long time. There is some argument with Gilbert Burns. Some fans think that Burns was actually the second best. I think with the Alan Marquez, if Sergey or Blaydes beating Tom Aspinall, do you think Jon Jones would also be ducking them? To be honest, yeah. In ducking, I mean, he would not fight them, even if they were the #1 contender. He might just want the easiest fights. I mean, he kind of said it. He wants the easiest fights for legacy. Because remember how he described Tom Aspinall? He's this guy in his prime. He's this faster, bigger guy and all this sort of stuff. Like, he made it seem as if fighting Tom Aspinall is way too dangerous compared to going up against Stipe or Alex Pereira. These other guys that would give him more money. But now it looks like Tom is going to be a very big fight. Sergey and Blaydes are dangerous fights, but they don't have that legacy attached to them that would make Jones even care to fight them. Right? I do agree with what Tom was saying. Tom agreed that Jon Jones is looking for these legacy fights, right? What would be the reason for him to fight me? But regardless, as fans, we don't care about that. He was the interim champ. Jones is the disputed champ. The fans still want to see the fight, whether Jones cares about unifying the titles or not. He is the champion. Either fight the interim champ or vacate the belt. It's that simple. We don't want to see weight classes get destroyed because of one fighter. Then with the Ewell, Dustin, Justin, Charles, and Chandler have all fought each other. Rank their fights from best to worst. What an era, man. Are these the 4 kings? Are these MMA's 4 kings? Like in boxing, you had Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Thomas Hearns, and Roberto Duran. Is this MMA's version of that? Dustin, Justin, Charles, and Chandler? The only difference is none of them were the best. It was Islam, and he fought 2 of those guys. It's hard to rank them. I would say the Oliveira and Chandler rematch was the worst fight out of them. Doesn't mean it was a bad fight. It was a really good fight. But out of those legendary wars, that was probably the worst one out of them. I think Charles versus Justin was the best fight out of them. It was wild from the very first punch. That was probably the most stressful fight to ever watch. First punch that lands, Charles rocks Justin with a right straight. Then Justin drops Charles twice, and then Charles drops Justin and chokes him out. And that was all in the first round. That has to go down as one of the greatest rounds in UFC history. Bro, I couldn't even sit down watching that. From the very first punch that Charles landed on Justin. So that's the best fight. I would say Dustin versus Justin 1 is the second best fight. Then Charles versus Chandler 1. Then Justin versus Chandler. Then Dustin versus Chandler. Dustin versus Charles. And then last would be Charles versus Chandler 2. And all great fights, by the way. There's like no wrong answers on this. Look at it, Benson Simpson. Top 5 worst UFC champions of all time. Nico Montano, Sean Shirk. He won the lightweight title, but then he got stripped of the title because of steroids. He didn't even have a single title defense either. Josh Barnett, same thing. He won the heavyweight title and tested positive for steroids multiple times. Dave Manet, I guess. He was the first middleweight champion, then lost the belt to Marilla Bustamante. And Jermaine Durandamy. She literally gave up her belt because she didn't want to fight Cyborg. Some people would say Matt Serra, but nah, Matt Serra was goated. He knocked out arguably the greatest fighter of all time, made him tap to strikes. I don't care if he lost his belt in his next fight to the same guy. Bro beat like the greatest fighter of all time. That certainly beats Dave Manet, Nico Montano, Jermaine Durandamy, and the steroid cheats, Sean Shirk and Josh Barnett. Then we go to Yoel Castro. Rank these title shots based on how undeserving they were. Dominic Cruz versus Henry Cejudo. Stipe Miocic versus Jon Jones. Yoel Romero versus Israel Adesanya. Brock Lesnar versus Randy Couture, and Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. The most undeserving title shot out of all of those. I would say number 1 is Stipe versus Jones, especially because there was an interim champion. Then number 2, Brock Lesnar versus Randy Couture. That was literally Lesnar's 3rd UFC fight, and he lost his debut in the UFC. 2 fights later, fights for the title. Kind of crazy. You could even say that's number 1, but he knocked out Randy Couture. You have to remember though, before Brock Lesnar was probably the worst heavyweight era ever. There was no one there. Andrei Arlovsky and Tim Sylvia had like a 3-year-long war before Randy Couture's elderly return to end that chapter. Beats Tim Sylvia, and then Lesnar came in, and that's when the best heavyweight era started in the UFC. The number 3, Israel Adesanya getting a title shot against Dricus. He already had his immediate rematch against Alex, and then he gets another immediate title shot against Dricus. Bro didn't have to win against anybody to get another immediate title fight. Then I would say Yoel Romero versus Israel Adesanya. Romero was coming off 2 losses to Whitaker and Costa, so that was an undeserved title shot, but the reason why it was more deserved than the other fights was because both of those losses were very close. In fact, a lot of fans thought he beat Whitaker. He did miss weight for the fight, so he wouldn't have became the champ, and also the Costa fight was very close, and everybody believed at the time that Yoel stylistically was the hardest match for Adesanya, so it was a respected call out. Adesanya won the toughest fight in the division, only for that fight to be one of the worst fights in UFC history. And then last is Dominic Cruz versus Henry Cejudo. So Dominic Cruz did not fight for 3.5 years. He was coming off a loss to Cody Garbrandt, but he never got his immediate title fight after losing. He was the most dominant bantamweight champion in UFC history. That's why it's not as undeserving as some of the others. You could say this is actually very similar to Stipe. The biggest difference is that there was no interim champion. If there's an interim champion, the disputed champion has to fight them. And also Stipe did get his immediate title fight. He did get his immediate title fight after losing to Daniel Cormier. Cruz never had his immediate title fight. Look at Aylin Mendez. How would these fighters have done if they stayed in the UFC? Ryan Bader might have been like top 10. Corey Anderson. Corey Anderson was actually good. He beat Glover Teixeira, like right before Glover went on that win streak. So I think Corey would have been top 5. Eddie Alvarez, he would have fun fights, but I would say somewhere in the top 10. Like a rematch with Michael Chandler would have been insane. He fought Dustin, he fought Justin. Imagine fighting Oliveira and Max Holloway. It would have been insane. It would have just added more to that golden era of the lightweight division, man. Sergio Pettis, which weight class? It depends on the weight class because his last fight in the UFC was at flyweight. But before and after, he went to bantamweight. I think at bantamweight, he would have been top 10. He would have been top 10, maybe top 5. Sergio Pettis was underrated. And then Gegard Mousasi. This is the most frustrating out of all of them. Why did he leave, man? Gegard Mousasi was so good, man. But if we're talking about in his prime, like if he just continued in the UFC, he could have eventually became champion if he beat Whitaker, because that was his next fight. Instead of Yoel Romero. Imagine that timeline if Gegard never left the UFC. Look at the Sleepy Squirtle. What's the most embarrassing call out of all time? The first ones that spring up to me are Conor calling out bantamweight Frankie Edgar and Diego Sanchez right after the Fabio mess. Thanks, we love the content. Thank you so much, man. I 100% agree. Not only is it Diego, who's clearly in a whole mess with this coach. Diego needed to retire, and you're calling him out to fight? This one, Conor was still really good too. And then the other one is Joaquin Buckley calling out Conor. And everyone was like, wait, what? Well, he redeemed himself when he called out Kamaru Usman. I was like, okay, now that's a really good call out. And he made it where the fans were able to be involved in the whole call out thing too. He went from the worst call out of the year to the best call out of the year. Then we go to VV cards. Whose glazing is more embarrassing? Dana White glazing and gaslighting us about Jon Jones versus Stipe, or Michael Chandler glazing and chasing Conor for 2 years, going on 3 now. Bro was talking about Jon Jones when Jon Jones is not even the topic of discussion. You could be talking about like the weather and Dana would somehow bring Jon Jones into it. He'd probably say like, it's so sunny today because the world is appreciating that Jon Jones is walking on this earth or something. And then him telling all the fans about, Jon Jones versus Stipe is the greatest versus greatest and all this sort of stuff, man. Come on. Can you imagine Dana did all of that? And this whole thing with Jon Jones being a duck, that Tom Aspinall would become a bigger name in the sport, so he knew that he would be able to promote that fight after and keep Jon Jones around, dangling that Tom Aspinall carrot. Is Dana that much of a business genius that he thought of all that? Because bro turned right around and loved the Tom Aspinall fight all of a sudden. Then what if Uriel? What if Jailton Almeida decided to stay at light heavyweight? He could have been top 5, but definitely top 10. Would he beat Ankalaev? No. Would he beat Alex? He could. I would favor Alex, but he could win that fight. Would he beat Jiri? No, I think Jiri would win. Could he beat Jamahal Hill? Possibly. That'd be an interesting fight. Maybe Jamal would have won, but it would have been an interesting fight. Could he beat Jan Blachowicz? I would pick Blachowicz, but it's a winnable fight for Almeida. I think he'll lose the Rakic. Could beat Olberg. It's another one of those kind of fights. He would beat Khalil Rountree. He would lose to Nikita Krylov. I think he'd beat Volkan. He would beat Johnny Walker, maybe. So he'd be like somewhere in the top 10, I would say. Definitely not a champion. Then Ogre Face, hot take, Belal Muhammad is a tough matchup for prime GSP. GSP wins, but not easily. Wrestling cancels each other out, and GSP has said himself he doesn't like pressure fighters. That's Belal's whole game, and GSP didn't have insane power like Jeff Neal to keep him in check. GSP wins via superior technique in a hard-fought battle. I do agree. I think Belal would give a good fight to GSP, but I think GSP is just more technical and everything. Belal might be physically stronger. He has the cardio and volume and all that stuff, and the grinding wrestling against the cage, which GSP didn't really fight against, right? GSP didn't fight against this like new fence wrestling style. When he fought Josh Koscheck, when he fought Johnny Hendricks, when he fought Matt Hughes, a lot of these guys are just blast double legs in open space. Not this whole thing about shooting against the fence and then trying to take you down by chain wrestling and tripping and ankle picking and all that sort of stuff. This new Dagestani influence wrestling is just different. I think it would have been something that GSP would have an issue with for like the first 2 rounds. He might get taken down a couple times, but I think as the fight goes on, he's going to show his fight IQ. He will adjust in the fight. He'll make the takedowns harder for Belal. He might get a takedown or 2 in the later rounds, but overall, I'll strike Belal with longer punches as jab, as 1-2 and stuff like that, while Belal eating some of the shots, but then landing a combination of his own. I think it would have been a good fight, but GSP would win. I don't think there's any welterweight that would have beaten GSP soundly. Like if you were to match him with anyone else, you would pick the other fighter. I think everyone would pick GSP against every single welterweight. And I don't think Belal would be his hardest fight. I think Kamaru Usman still is his hardest fight. They'll go to R. If Dricus beats Khamzat, where does that put him in the pound for pound rankings? That guy would have beaten Whitaker, Strickland, Adesanya, and Chimaev in 2 years. Crazy. If he beats Khamzat after beating Strickland twice, Whitaker and Adesanya, at least he would have to be in the top 3. Would you put him at number 1 though, above Islam? Well, you have to remember in that time, Islam would have other fights as well. So would Ilia, Pantoja, and Alex. So I wouldn't disagree if he's in the top 3 anywhere. Even number 1 to number 3, I wouldn't disagree with it. There were the slim clips. Why do most fans just make excuses for heavy fighters being so much worse than lighter fighters when comparing them? There's no magical force stopping them from being more skilled. It's just a small talent pool and training bully problem that lets them have success with lower standards. This is what I'm saying, man. We cannot give these excuses to these heavy fighters. Because here's the thing, it's not just the smaller they are, because flyweights are not as skilled as lightweights. So it's not the smaller they are, because obviously the flyweights are lighter than all of them. They're all very athletic. They're all very fast. They're the fastest fighters in the UFC. They're the most agile, but they're not the best. They're not the most skilled. They're not the most technical. The main reason that these heavy fighters are not as good as the lighter fighters is mainly because the talent isn't there. The actual talented athletes of that size are in basketball, are in American football, baseball, etc. That's the main reason why. Because why are the most technical fighters in the UFC from bantamweight to lightweight? Those guys are more technical than most of the flyweights. They're more technical than most of the welterweights. Why is that? And for a long time, the lightweights were more technical than the bantamweights, even though they're 2 weight classes heavier. The main thing is people mistake technique with flash. If you throw a spinning kick, that's seen as technical, when that's not true. Look at Ilia Topuria. That is the most basic and fundamental as it gets. There is nothing stopping a heavyweight fighting like Ilia Topuria. He's not doing anything super agile or throwing some crazy acrobatic techniques. Bro's doing the basics in boxing, but mastering that craft. The basics in boxing is used by every single weight class. Ilia barely kicks. His takedowns are not anything crazy. He's just really good with his timing. And we've seen heavyweight wrestlers with really good timing before. But now, there's only Jon Jones and Tom. No one else can wrestle like that. And Curtis Blaydes is good too, but I think it's coping for the heavy fighters. You can't tell me heavyweights cannot fight like Dustin. Dustin doesn't do anything flashy. He's not agile. He's kind of like Ilia. He's just using the basics of boxing. He barely kicks. He barely shoots takedowns, and he's one of the best fighters in the world. Look at the way Tai Tuivasa fights. He's just swinging for most of it. Like Derek Lewis, that's top 15. Look at Marcin Tybura. Look at Sergey Spivak. Jailton Almeida only throws a front kick when he stands up with them. And he's very athletic. Almeida is very athletic. He's very fast. All bro throws is a front kick and then double leg. And he's number 6 in the rankings. Now he's more agile on the ground, but no one in the top 10 of bantamweight to lightweight is fighting like that. Jiri Prochazka is essentially like the light heavyweight version of Dan Hooker. And bro became a champ. He's even wilder than Hooker is. Hooker's more technical than he is, but they both fight similar. Like they're both super aggressive. They have their hands at their waist for most of the fight. They rely on their chin. They're both very tough. They throw punches from their hip. They're both long and tall. Like they're very similar. Even the way they throw punches and kicks is similar. Like their mechanics just look alike. And Jiri became a champion. Dan Hooker never even fought for a title. There's no way people are making excuses for this. And that's not to rag on any of these fighters. I still like Jiri. I still like a lot of these heavy guys. Middleweight to heavyweight is just so low skill. It just is. With only a few outliers. Like Jon Jones is very good. Tom Aspinall is very good. Alex Pereira is very good. Magomed Ankalaev is good. Dricus has plot armor, so he'll win any fight no matter who it's against. Adesanya is a good striker. Khamzat is very good. If Khamzat can wrestle that well, better than most bantamweights to lightweights, like he's technically better than most of these guys that's ever fought in the UFC, regardless of the weight class. Whitaker is good. I think Caio Borralho is good as well. Jan Blachowicz is good, and that's pretty much where it ends. Every other fighter does not compare to the lighter weight classes. None of them do. Those are the only fighters that compare. And I'll say this, right now, most of the fans will not agree with that, but maybe in like 10 years, this is going to be the common opinion. And that goes into the last question. Parker asks, top 5 most technical fighters right now. Number 1, Islam. Number 2, Ilia. Number 3, Volkanovski. Number 4, Jones. And number 5, that's a tough one. I would say it could be Max, could be Dustin. Maybe a hot take, it could be Umar. He's very well-rounded. I would say any of them. And then one more question. We'll do David. It feels like we're re-entering an era of champions who, frankly, I can't see losing. Ilia, Islam, and Tom. Which of these unkillable Goliaths gets the slingshot first? Really good reference. Which of those fighters will lose first? I would say Ilia. And the reason would be because he went up to lightweight. He could lose to Charles, Dustin, or Islam. Those are the fighters that he would want to fight, and any of those fighters can beat him. I think Islam has the least likely chance of losing. Maybe. It is MMA. Maybe Arman could win, but I think Islam has the lowest chance of losing. And Tom's like in the middle. He could lose to Jones, but if he beats Jones, no one's beating this guy. And that's the end of the episode, guys. Amazing questions, great debates. Whether we agree or disagree, it's just fun at the end of the day. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Merry Christmas to everybody. Happy holidays. Have fun, enjoy yourselves, and I'll see you guys in the next video.